All right, good evening, everyone. It's about 7 o'clock, so we're going to get started here. Welcome to the Angular Mountain View meetup. Happy to have everyone here. Sorry about the maybe vague posting of evening with the Angular CLI team. We wanted to make sure that the team was as focused as possible on working on the product, so we left it a little bit late to get the descriptions and up, but everyone found the meetup, and everyone, I hope, is excited to be here. You excited to be here? Yeah. Awesome. So I'm going to start off with some boring stuff about Angular before we get into the CLI. Just a few kind of brief updates from what's been happening recently. So ngConf was last week, which is one of the big conferences that a few of our team members are able to attend. All of those videos are online. So if you just search on YouTube for ngConf, really great content, really amazing stuff. A lot about version 6, if you want to hear more about that. A lot about cool projects like Ivy, Elements, as well as a lot about NGRX we saw too. I want to give everyone a brief status update on where V6 is at in terms of our roadmap and where we're headed there. So one of our dependencies, RxJS, just released their final version of 6.0, which is not numbered intentionally the same as us. So that was a coincidence. They're not actually part of our release process, but they hit 6.0, which is a good sign. And then we are holding Angular, Material, and CLI, all of these different packages in RC status until everything's working together perfectly. And then we'll hit the big button and we'll label them all 6.0.0 at the same time. So if you're interested in giving this a try, I'll give you some instructions in a second. Or we're pushing a new site that we're still working on a little bit, update.angular.io. In general, what we're working on still with 6.0.0, the main blockers for release are a lot of the work in the CLI. So we can listen to these folks and hear all the amazing things they're doing, and then you'll actually have an understanding of the awesome things that are going into the next release. So if you are interested in giving the RCs of V6 a try, this is all on update.angular.io, but the general instructions are kind of basically broken down into 3 steps. Update your CLI and migrate your config. Then you're going to update Angular using this cool new command we have, ng-update. And then you're going to update all of your dependencies. So if that's material, you're going to ng-update add angular/material. Not only will we update your NPM and package.json dependencies, we'll also be updating some of your code when it makes sense to do so to remove things like deprecated APIs or add compatibility libraries, etc. Where are we going to be in the next couple months here? So tonight, you're here, Angular Mountain View with the CLI team. Hopefully everyone's in the right spot. The day before Google I/O, so May 7th, we're having a social. So instead of our normal monthly meetup, we're doing a social where everyone's just going to come, have food, talk to each other, talk to developers. We're going to have a lot of our Google developer experts in town. So they'll be visiting. You'll be able to have a chance to talk to them, as well as a few members of the team. On May 9th, at around 4:30 p.m., we're having our Google I/O session about what's new in Angular. So you'll be hearing about some of the changes in 6. You'll be hearing about some of the upcoming changes with Ivy. Also on the 11th, we are supporting an organization called NG Girls, where they are training developers to learn Angular. So if you're interested in applying, ask me for information, or you can search for NG Girls online. They've got a whole process that they go through to get awesome folks in who want to learn Angular. I think there's still a few spots left. We capped it at something like 90, so get in an application soon if you're interested in going. We are also presenting at a bunch of other conferences. We are developers, Build, Fluent, and Fluent, put on by O'Reilly. They give us a bunch of swag. So if you want some O'Reilly swag, we have books, stickers, pop, whatever those are called. Kara, what are those called when you put it on your phone? Pop sockets. We have pop sockets, so you can like put your phone on a tilt or whatever. No, we have O'Reilly pop sockets, which is almost as good as Angular pop sockets, right? All right, so I'll just leave the box up there if anyone is interested in any of that. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to the 4 esteemed members of our CLI family here. We're going to hear first from Hans, and he'll give a little bit of an overview about where things are headed. And then we'll hear from Filipe, who will talk a little bit about some of the build system and some of the configuration that you can now do as part of your Angular CLI workspaces. Then we'll move over to Chuck, who's going to talk about libraries. And we'll end with Mike, who's going to tell us all about schematics and give us some tips for building some of our own schematics. So let's start with Hans here. So everyone give Hans a round of applause.
1, 2, 1, 2. You guys can hear me well? Cool. Awesome. So how are you doing today? Yeah, good, awesome, cool. So how many, show of hand, how many of you are actually using Angular? Okay. How many of you are using the CLI? Okay. So those who haven't raised their hand, I saw a few hands that didn't raise for Angular. I saw a few hands that raised for CLI. I'm actually really curious. But I feel like overall everybody knows about like the CLI. What is it? It's easy to make Angular website. It's easy to create Angular application and manage them. And that's great. That's great to have such a good like user base, people who knows what the CLI is. And today we're gonna focus more or less on what the CLI 6.0 is gonna bring. And some people actually ask me like, oh my God, 1.7 to 6, why the big change? We are actually merging our version number, locking our version number with the Angular. So you know better, like, okay, Angular 6 works with Angular CLI 6. And Angular 7 will probably have Angular CLI 7 as well. So we're going to lock our major version with this CLI. So don't be afraid. 1.7 to 6, it's not that there's 5 breaking changes. It's just that we're going with the Angular framework for our versioning. And so today, what I'm going to talk about a little bit is that we're adding 2 new features. And these will be a little bit more in-depth later. But for now, what I'm going to talk about is the high level, like what does it mean for you guys? And the first feature that I'm going to talk about is ng-add. And this is going to revolutionize the way you actually integrate with third-party libraries, the way you start using third-party libraries. But it's going to revolutionize it just a little. What's going to really make the difference is ng-update, which I'm going to talk a little bit later. But basically, what is going to help you keep up to date with changes from third-party libraries. And when I say third-party, I mean your third party. So that includes Angular, which is a first party for us. This can be a little bit. But basically, ng-update will keep up to date with everything. And I'll talk later, but it's really something that's going to be awesome. Yeah.
Slack open.
I press Q on it. There you go.
Thank you.
You're welcome. And after that, I'm going to have a little bit of chat about Angular. What's the future of Angular? 6.x, 7, 10, 20. I don't think I'm going to go that far, but I'm going to talk a little bit about what's coming up in the next few months as far as the CLI is concerned. And so to talk a little bit about add first, so what does ng-add really means for you? ng-add is our way to integrate as a convention with third-party libraries. Like, for example, you can add to your website Angular material with one single command. You can add to your website, like, you can make your website PWA. You can add NGRX, and those will and ng bootstrap, right? Yeah. Okay, cool. I'm not cool. And those will automatically add themselves and configure themselves. And this is kind of a game changer, because right now, if you want to add like Firebase, you have to follow a big tutorial: npm install Firebase, npm install Angular Fire, and then you have to add like things into your module and all that. It becomes possible for us to provide to you an automated path so that you don't even have to input anything. Or maybe you can have like a certain set of options or a certain prompt. And it makes it really easy for you to start building your Angular app and add, as you go, new features to it. For example, you just started a new application. You want to add material. You do ng-add material, and suddenly everything is configured, and you get like new layouts, new schematics, and these kind of new generate commands, and these kind of things that are super great and super easy to use for you. The second command that I wanted to talk about today was ng-update, which is a little bit more involved, but really means for you, this is going to be a game changer. Because right now, if you want to move from like a library from a version X to a version X+1, often there's going to be like breaking changes, and there's going to be different ways to change, different things to changes. You need to refactor your code a little bit. You need to change like a new class that uses or some best practices that have changed. And what you can do is you can basically use ng-update to move from a library version X, for example, Angular Material 5, to version X+1, Angular Material 6. And automatically, it's going to refactor your project. It's going to try to figure out how to update, how to change your project so you're compatible with Angular Material 6. There is a few breaking changes. Material is a great example because there was a few breaking changes that they introduced that are automatically updated when you use ng-update at Angular/Material. So it updates your project automatically. It also updates your dependencies automatically. And libraries can actually integrate with ng-update in a way that they can refactor your code to make sure that no breaking change are actually breaking. You can update your app as you go. And of course, we're committing to having like Angular first parties have update for every breaking changes. And well, like I said, Angular 5 to 6 is a good example because it changes, like some attributes have changed name, for example. So you're going to go through your templates and change the attribute to the new name or change the new selector to something else. And I wanted to talk a little bit about the future of CLI version greater than 6. But first, I'm going to let Filipe talk. And I'm going to let all these great guys that are making the CLI really awesome. By the way, we couldn't do that without these 3 people. That's just, they're the best. Just wanted to say that. And the CLI couldn't be where it is today without their help, definitely. And so I'm going to let Filipe come to stage, and then Charles, and then Mike. And then I'm going to come back to talk about what comes next, basically, about the future. All right. What's the clicker? Next. Oh, sorry. I shouldn't do that. Maybe I should allow myself.
Hi, all. First of all, I'd like to give a big thank you to Steven because I told him like this is going to be my birthday while I'm there, and he said, I'm going to make you like a big birthday party. Everyone's going to be there. There's going to be food, drink, nachos. You're just going to have to say a few words. So it's like, okay, I can do that. That's easy. And he said, talk a little bit about what you've been working on, which is the Angular workspace. And okay, that's fine. I can do that. Everything, for nice food and drinks. That's what does it for me. So what we call the Angular workspace is condensed in the new angular.json. This replaces your old file, which was the Angular CLI.json, but it's not the same. It has like a different format. It says different things. And our purpose with actually making a different file instead of the one that you're used to is to be able to better express both the project and the tooling configuration. The old Angular CLI.json contains some information about your app. And although it was possible to have more than one app there, it wasn't very easy. And you had to repeat a lot of stuff, and all the configuration was kind of like melded together. And we wanted to fix that. And we also wanted to give you a way to actually configure all of these tools that are part of an Angular CLI project individually. A lot of people had very big NPM scripts that actually did what they needed their project to do. So what we have now in the new Angular workspace is that we can support seamlessly multiple projects. In fact, when you update, you're automatically going to have 2 projects. You have your app proper, and you have your app E2E. Because for all intents and purposes, even though your end-to-end suite tests your app, it's actually a separate application. It's a Node app that uses Protractor to communicate to the browser and hit your server and touch a bunch of stuff. We also wanted to put there every option that we use. There were a bunch of options that before you just couldn't put on a file. You had to like do --AOT, you had to do --prod, you had to do, for instance, --, name chunks if you actually needed to change the name chunks. So every option that we use is going to be in this file. We also have something that's called configuration sets. The whole idea, and I'll explain configuration sets later better, is to group the options that you had to configure for each of your environments for like production, staging, testing, etc., in a single group. So instead of having a long npm script that says ng-build --prod --environment staging --aot --source maps, you can just put that in a single place, and all of those options are used when you call them. And we also want this file to serve as extension point for our commands. So if you want to change some of our commands, change some of our schematics, you can do that via this file. I'm not going to be talking a lot about this now. I just wanted to like leave a little breadcrumb saying that this is something that is part of the vision for the workspace, but it's something that we're going to be talking about over the next few months. This is generally in like if you've done an RC project and you've seen this file is much bigger than you see that I'm showing you here. But this is like the gist of it. We have some properties that talk about how projects are managed, where projects go, what's the default project. We have some CLI-specific configuration items. We also have some configuration items for schematics. And then we have a projects object that contains all of your projects. And these have their own configuration. Where you see the key architect there is where the build configuration is. And I'm going to be showing some examples of that in a few minutes. I don't want to go too deeply into why it's called architect. That's going to be part of what we're talking about in the next few months. But that's where the build options go. And there I had something called my awesome lib. We're having first-party library support. We're using the very, very excellent ng packager. Chuck is going to be talking about that in the upcoming slides. But if you wanted to actually have these several applications, you do something like ng-generate application, my awesome app. And then ng-generate library, my helpful library. And then you can build them separately. Or for some things that make sense, like you can test them separately, but when you test your workspace, you want everything to be tested. So if you had 2 projects and you did ng-test, all projects that could be tested would be tested. It makes a bit less sense for some of the other commands. For instance, it doesn't make too much sense to serve everything at once, because if we're talking about like 3 applications, it would be kind of surprising that they're built at once and like 3 browser windows pop up, etc. So that's an example of a command that only runs one thing, and ng-test is an example of a command that runs a bunch of things. I mentioned that we could put down any option that you want. Inside that architect key that I mentioned, we have a build key that says, okay, this is how you build your project, and these are the options. By default, our projects don't build in AOT, but you can say this now. You can just say that every time that I build this, I want it to be in AOT, which I think is ideal for small and medium projects. It has some scaling issues right now on big projects, but for small and medium projects, I see no reason why you wouldn't want to do AOT all the time. So instead of doing ng-serve AOT, you can just put this down. Every build is going to be in AOT. I mentioned something about configurations. So an use case that we saw a lot was that people had npm scripts that did ng-build prod -- source maps, for instance. And the fact is, you couldn't put those options down. You couldn't say, this is a set of things that I want to use together for this environment, because you're setting options like initially in an exploratory way. You set some options because you want to know what works for your project. What's the configuration set that works for your project? But after that, you kind of stick to the same options. You put them down in an npm script, and you say, this is how I built for prod. This is how I built for dev. This is how I built for staging, in any other environment that you have. So we came up with this concept of configurations. We say that our final options are the base options that you have, plus any configurations on top of that, plus the flags that you put. So if hypothetically you wanted the production configuration, which is equivalent to the old -- prod, you now have all of those options set there. You don't need to disable them individually via flags, although you can, because you can just say, I want prod, but with source maps. Prod by default comes without source maps, for instance. This is how configurations look like. When we update your project, or when you make a new project, we have the production configuration that contains the granular options that we always did in prod implicitly. Like prod has always been this kind of meta flag that set a bunch of other flags, some that you could control, some that you couldn't. So the optimization flag is one that has historically caused some problems because some libraries might not be very easily minifiable. Now you can turn it off. I don't recommend it, but if you need it for compatibility purposes, you can. But more importantly, you can set each of these options on and off according to what your environment actually needs. And you can do this for any amount of environments. So for instance, ng-build would use no configuration. It would use just the default options. ng-build -- prod and ng-build -- configuration equals production are the same thing, which is the prod that you're used to right now in Angular CLI. But you can add any other configuration set with whatever options you need. So for instance, in Angular IO, we have a staging configuration where we have a different environment, different file replacements for environments, etc. You can put all of these down, and instead of having a very long NPM script, you just have this command. And for instance, if you're testing your production configuration and something is weird in the way that AOT wires things up, you can just turn it off via a flag that just overrides everything at the end. We found this to be very useful, especially in bigger projects that you have a lot of NPM scripts to do this. Hopefully, this will make things a bit clearer. We also have, inside of our configuration files, things that reference existing configurations. And I like to use serve as an example for this. When you serve, you kind of don't want to just say everything that you're building again. So you say, oh, what I'm actually building is my awesome app. Or when you serve for production via a production environment, you're saying, I want to use whatever options are already there. So, and this key here we have, oh, I want to build my option app, but I want to build it with a production configuration. So your serve will automatically serve all of that. And you can do this for all the other environments that you have. And now I'm sorry, I speak very fast, man. I'm nervous. I am going to pass the mic to Charles, or Chuck, how he was introduced. Round of applause for Chuck, please.
Got it. All right, so one of the most requested features, I think, is library support in CLI. So with version 6, we now have first-class library support. So one of the nice things is you get an application-like experience. So if you're familiar with how you create an application with CLI right now, you can create a library in a very similar form. We used ngpackager. It's a community project and leverage that underneath, similar to how we currently use Webpack underneath and abstract the build system for your application. So all the features of ngpackager underneath, we now can use in the CLI, and you don't have to worry about all the details of configuring the library and worrying about, well, did I use the latest documentation for the packaging format? Do I have the right bundles? Is my package.json fields set up properly? Do I have the right paths in there? So you get all that for essentially free now by using the CLI. You also get AOT metadata support that'll automatically build in there, and your type definitions. So once you import your project in an application or one of your users, you get all your TypeScript types built in. And some of the nice things about the setup is that you have full CSS process support. So if you're using Stylus, you're using Less, you're using Sass, all of those are automatically compiled and turned into CSS for you, and they get inlined along with your HTML templates, so you don't have to worry about those files missing when someone tries to go and use your library in an application. Now, since this is now completely first class in the CLI, you also get all the other nice features that applications have right now. So if you want a linting is built in. If you want to test, there's Karma configurations already set up, so you can just do ng test, and then your library is automatically unit tested. So to do this now, there's really only 3 steps to get a built library that you could then use. Now, obviously, there wouldn't be very much in there that you could use in an application, but you would have a fully built library that could then be published onto NPM. So the first step is your ng new. Now, that would recreate your initial workspace, and this, by default, in version 6, creates an application as well. Now, in the future, we might allow some more options, so you could just generate a blank workspace or just a library. But for now, you get an application by default. But this is generally useful because, say you wanted to do a demo app or you wanted to make a documentation website, or maybe you just want to scratch applications in there to experiment with. So that is available there. So once you do that, the second step is to use generate. When you generate your library, it scaffolds out the entire structure you would need for the library. You get a template package.json with the name of your library and any other required fields. You also get a starter module and a service and a component, just as an example of how all those would be connected together, and then the structure for those. And then also it installs ng packager for you and all the necessary dependencies to actually build a library. So you don't need those dependencies if you just have an application. But as soon as you want a library, all those are brought in and automatically will either use npm or yarn if yarn's configured as your default package manager, install all those dependencies for you, and set them all up and configure everything, so you don't actually have to worry about the details of how to build the project. And from there, you can use your standard generate commands. If you want a component, you do ng generate component. You want a service, same thing. And all the nice features of those commands follow over to a library. It automatically refactors your modules if you had a component, so you'll automatically have those declared in your modules. Same with services, pipes, whatever else you'd want. Then the final step is ng build, and if you want a production build, you do -- prod, and then the name of the library. This will output a ready-to-publish package. It'll fill in the template package.json with all the fields, point them to all the different bundles. You'll have your FESMs, you'll have a UMD bundle, everything will be there, so that you can just use that right away. Now, another nice thing is that the CLI will also adjust your base TS config that will set up path mapping to the built library in your dist folder. So if you have an application or several applications in the same workspace, you can import and use the elements of that library directly as if it was installed via node modules. Then you can test out your application, or your libraries, and everything is in one spot, and you don't have to change your code when you finally publish up to npm. So just the overview, you really only need 4 steps now to get a fully functional and compliant application, or library rather, with the CLI. You create your workspace, you generate your library, or several libraries if you'd like. Then you can generate all your components, your services, pipes, what have you. And then to build, you use your standard build command, and in your dist folder, you now have a properly packaged library that can be used in your own applications, published up to npm for others to use, or even internally in your own enterprise if that's the case. I'm going to give it over to Mike, who's going to talk about schematics and give you some demos as well. Yeah.
Hello, hello.
Hello.
Thanks. My name is Mike Brocchi. Today I'm going to be talking about schematics. Hands up. Who has heard of schematics? Not too few. I'm not going to look over here. We've talked about it. It's cool. All right, schematics. And then how many people here have used schematics? That's a trick question. Schematics have been part of the Angular CLI since version 1.4. So if you're using anything later than 1.4 or 1.4 of Angular CLI, you're using schematics. So what are they, and how do they help you out? So schematics is basically this rules engine that will take an input, which is your file system, run some different process and logic against it, and then spit it back out to your file system, assuming it runs correctly without any errors. And that's a very important key of schematics, is that if there's any failures, it's actually processing against a virtual file system in memory. So if there's an error, you're not doing anything to damage your environment if the process that you're running will fail, which is a huge, huge benefit. So what do schematics do for us with the Angular CLI? Well, as I've mentioned, that anytime you generate or do anything within the CLI, it's using schematics. So the new command is actually processing a schematic, or actually a set of schematics, to be able to output a new project for you. There's with version 6, it will run the ng new schematic, which will run a workspace schematic to be able to generate a workspace. Once you've generated a workspace, it will generate an application in the workspace. Inside that application schematic, it will run both a new module to give you your root module, as well as a component schematic to be able to get you all of that information to be able to scaffold that up. So there's 5 schematics every time you run ng new. So they're composable as well, and we'll take a look a bit at that as we get into some examples. Also, ng generate. So anytime you generate something, whether or not it's something as simple as an interface or an enumeration, all the way up to a component or a new application workspace or component, which has a lot more logic into it. So it works for the really small examples as well as the larger examples. Also, Hans earlier mentioned the feature of the new command of ng-add. ng-add was given the power to library developers, first-party and third-party developers, to be able to add a schematic within your application, within your package, to say, hey, anytime somebody runs ng-add of my package name, that it'll go ahead and install it for you, an npm install, which is great, and you get it local there. But then you can add your own custom logic. The example of Firebase was used. I like that example. So it will go out and say, hey, your application, and this is a little tip for David East if he decides to get on board here. If not, maybe somebody here can help him out with that. To be able to run different logic, to be able to go into your environments and set up your configuration for you. Automatically declare and provide the modules that are exposed from that. So that this way your setups for your different libraries goes from do this whole big scroll wiki article within your repo, your README, to be able to set it up to just a single command of ng-add and then your package name. And all that complex logic that you try to describe and carefully document out is all just handled by one single command. ng-update is another great example of where's a good use case for schematics. So when you update your application, we can go in and use all different tools that are available to us as developers, especially for a TypeScript application, where we can use the TypeScript abstract syntax tree to be able to ascertain different information about your application of how does it work, what tools is it using to be able to find those pieces of code and those patterns of breaking changes to be able to modify your application for you so that the breaking changes are alleviated. Stephen actually brought up a really good word when talking about the ng-update feature at ngconf last week that I heard from a friend of a friend, that he called your packages are now evergreen. So if you think about your browsers, that they're evergreen, they always self-update, so that if there's a change, you just get it. It automatically downloads an update. This is a little bit hands-on in that you just have to run a single command. But then you can easily stay up on the latest version. So if things get faster with things like Ivy, if there happens to be any breaking changes, which aren't planned, but things happen with different changes as you implement them. But through ng-update, we could go evaluate those patterns and to be able to update those applications for you. Great feature. Super excited about that. So if you're writing a library and you are looking at implementing update, please talk to us and we can try and help you out. So wanted to take a look and look through some examples of what's out there and how we're currently using schematics. So I have a few things set up here. So what I want to do is I'm going to go through an example of generate. I'm going to go through a basic example of generate, an example of when you use ng-add, and also an example for ng-update. So in here, I have the dev kit repo, which is where the schematics library itself lives, as well as the schematics that you use for the Angular CLI. So underneath here, we have schematics and Angular. And I'm just going to go through, and we're going to start real basic of what we have here. And one of the easiest ones is class. Actually, I'm going to start higher level. Sorry. I'm going to go to the package.json, which is where we initially start. So when you're setting up schematics. So inside the package.json, which we're all familiar with, there's a new key here called schematics. And what that's doing is saying, hey, schematics, they're configured under this JSON file. Nothing special about the name collection.json. But if it's the mindset that a collection is a set of schematics. So more than one schematics, like an array of schematics, collection, same word, same meaning. So this is saying, hey, to find out about my schematics for this package, go ahead and look at this collection.json. So we can go in there and we'll see that it's just a JSON file with a top level key called schematics. Okay, makes sense because we're configuring schematics. And then you'll see listed here, and I'm just going to pull it all just so we can see that. And inside schematics, you can see a listing of all the different things that you're probably familiar with. Hey, I created a new application. I bet you it's running that schematic. Service worker, application, class, component, enumeration, all these things that you're used to. New ones like library as well. Excuse me. So I'm going to start off with a smaller example, class, because there's not a lot of logic and we can understand what's happening. So here we've defined an alias. So whenever you're running ng-generate, G was an abbreviation that we put into the CLI. But instead of typing ng-generate class or ng-g class, here as part of the schematic, we can define our own alias. So CL is going to be the alias to generate a class because component's a little bit more common, so we use C for that. But this is great for you as a developer. If you're running your own custom schematics, that you can provide your own aliases to make it easier for your developers using your schematics to be able to generate the pieces that they need in their application easier. Factory, and we'll dive into this in a little bit, is the directory location of, hey, where do I find the code that I run when that schematic runs? Description, that's pretty straightforward. It's just a little text to explain what this schematic does. The CLI will also automatically pick up this description. So if you were to run ng-generate help, or excuse me, ng-generate class -- help, it will find the description for this here as well as the options. Speaking of options for the class schematic, those are defined in a schema, which is JSON schema. You can find documentation about that quite a few places online, but it documents what different options are available when you run a given schematic. So let's take a look and we'll start there. So we have this schema, and you'll see that we've got some properties here. It's got some description about it up above. You see it's using the JSON schema. And the first property we'll see is name. So name, we get to see this type of string, which tells the CLI, says, hey, when you parse this, hey, I'm a string, so I'm not a number. Don't try and make me a Boolean or anything. I'm a string. A description about it, as well as this thing called $default, which is something new that we've added in the CLI with version 6, is the idea of providing a smart default provider, which is a lot of words, but what it allows you to do is saying, hey, the source for the default of this is going to be coming from the argv. So the arguments that you pass from the command, and then I just want the one that's at index 0, and that one, since it's the first one, I want that to be my name. So there's no more special magic in the CLI that says, hey, the first one, if you've specified name, yeah, that's not an option. That's going to be an argument. You have full control over that here when you're defining your schematic. As well as a few other options here, the path of where you want it to go, the project, which project it's supposed to be a part of, whether or not you want a spec file, as well as the type. Type on class is the idea. If you specify model as the value for type, and if you were to do ng-generate class foo space model, it will give you a file name, foo.model, just a little helper. Otherwise, you just see foo and you're not sure what that is. Is that a component? So it gives you the ability to specify a little bit of information about that. So the other thing we talked about in the collection is the logic that it's going to run. So that's the factory. That says, hey, that's in the class directory. And by convention with Node, index is what it is going to look for within there. Hide this. This font size is good. Everybody can see this, right? I should have asked that earlier, but we're good now. Okay, now that we're actually looking at code. All right, so what it's going to do, it's going to find the default function because it's just specifying, hey, that index file, what am I going to use? The default export from there. You'll see here, it's returning something called a rule. And a rule is the logic that you're going to be able to process against a tree. And that tree is the virtual file system. So here it's returning a function that takes in the tree and the context, which gives you access to the logger, as well as a few other contextual things, again, with context. Contextual makes sense, to be able to know a little bit about your execution context, about how that runs. So we go through and we find the workspace, because you want to know about your environment and the little helper method within the schematics for the Angular CLI to be able to get some workspace information, as well as the projects. If you don't specify a project, we'll just say, hey, no problem. We'll get the key from that angular.json that Filipe was talking about earlier. Find the first key for the project, and we're just going to use that one as your default. Actually, default project is new. This is a bug. Perfect. If somebody wants to log that, feel free. So yeah, we're going to use the default project that you define there to be able to say, hey, you didn't give us a project, but this is your default one, so that's where we're going to generate. Specifies a few other information here, the path about where it goes, whether or not it's an application or a library, the type. If you specified, we'll go in there to make the name of your type, and a few other preparations. Next thing it'll do down here is it'll grab the template source. So apply is a way of grabbing external files to be able to process them as a rule to be able to get them into your tree. Eventually, it'll return something called a source, which then gets merged into the rest of your tree. So we're applying everything from this URL. So we see it's a relative path. We say, okay, relative path, we can find that. And it's going to go into the files directory. There's a few different strangely named files in here. So you see __ name. So ignore the rest of that right now. But __ as a prefix and suffix is a replacement convention to be able to replace in a file name. So in here, it's replacing the name. So you'll see here there are, we have this here is a replacement, what I'm highlighting. So underscore name, and then it's @-rise. So @ is a way of saying, hey, call the -rise function, passing in the name as a parameter here. So it's taking whatever name you have. So if you have a camel case or what have you, it'll turn into a -rise name for be able to output in onto the file system. And then it's also doing another replacement afterwards with the __type __. So it gives you a little bit of control of defining your own functions of how you want to do that. But you wonder, -rise, is that something special? Is that something that I haven't defined? Where is that actually coming from? So one here, when we are rendering our template, you can pass in strings. And strings is a utility that we have within this package to be able to have different string manipulations. One of the methods within strings is -rise. So that's where that comes from, as well as supplying in any of the options that we may have to be able to do any replacements. Also, we're using another rule that's built in called filter. So whenever we run filter, if you want a spec, it's not going to do anything. But if you don't want a spec file, it's going to filter it out for each path that it comes across. And if it ends with .spec.ts, it's going to say, hey, filter that out because I don't want that. So here we have a lot of control over what we're being generated. So we can apply the logic from our options against the templates that we have within here. And then branch and merge is the idea of taking out or taking a copy of what you have, essentially, and creating a little workspace of where you want to do some processing, evaluate against it, and then merge it back in. Think about it just like a Git branch. You want to check something out, you do some work. When you're done, you merge it back in. The other thing is when you template, we have the idea in their EJS style. So in here, we have the classify function. That is also part of that strings package. So we can process that name to be classified. So capital letter to start. I forget the name of the case if that's Pascal, but I believe so. And it will put that in as the name of your class of what you'd expect. And it'll do that replacement for when it spits that file out. And we'll be around afterwards. If you have questions, please ask questions. So that's a little overview of what happens when you run ng-generate of a new class. But like I said, schematics is not just generating files. You can do a lot more complicated things with that. So one of the things that Hans mentioned with ng-add is the idea of adding material. But what I'm going to do, because we have it right here in this repo, is we have @angular/pwa. So if you want to add PWA functionality to your application, we can process that. The package is here, same logic. We define schematics, convention. Hey, it's in something called collection.json. So I can look in there and say, hey, what do you do? So in here, ng-add, I've defined a schematic named ng-add. Now that name is special. So when you run ng-add for a package, it's going to say, hey, go ahead and download that package from npm, and then find the schematic named ng-add within that package's collection of schematics. So it looks for that keyword and says, haha, I found you. That's the logic that I need to run in order to process ng-add and add that logic into your application. So we talked about the description and the schema to define those options that are available to you. And then also private and hidden, because we don't necessarily want you to run this separately. By default, when you run a schematic, it doesn't allow you to run private and hidden. ng-add is a special scenario that'll allow you to tunnel in and say, you're good, I got you covered, we'll let you run. So the factory for PWA, we can take a look at that. And you see here I have the utility function. I moved that some of that configuration logic over from the core library because this is a separate package within our repo here. So in here, if we go in and get rid of that, and here, we'll start here and look at the default function. So you can see the same convention. All right, we have a rule and it's taken in some options. And all those options are is an interface based off of the JSON schema. There's tooling online to be able to convert a JSON schema into a TypeScript interface, to be able to get those and get type information, because writing code with TypeScript is a lot easier than JavaScript. So in here, you see we find the workspace, the project that we want to work against, set up some other variables within there, and template. So we're going to generate some files within here. Okay, so we're going to generate everything that's in file assets. We'll take a look here. We'll say, hey, in those assets, we've got some icons and a manifest file. which are great because that's all part of the PWA process to have your icons and your manifest to be able to add that into an application. So we're going to go ahead and render those. Also, we're going to add a task in order to, for schematics to the PWA, I believe there's a package that gets updated as part of this. So we're going to say, hey, at the end, run an npm install. So not only is it modifying your file system, but it allows you to define certain number of tasks that are built in to be able to execute after the schematic has done processed. In this case, we're going to do an npm install. And the first thing it's going to do is say, hey, in order to have a service worker, the first thing you need, or excuse me, have a PWA, you need to have a service worker. So that's going to go through and say, hey, add service worker. We'll go to the definition of that. Make this a little bit clearer. And that's real easy because all of that logic is in a different schematic. And that lives under @schematic/Angular. And again, if we looked in our folder structure here, that's under the package of @schematics, Angular. Then if we scroll down, service worker lives in here. So it's saying, hey, call out to something else and run that processing for me. And then when you're done, we're great. I'll just pass in the options that you need. It logs into the console to say, hey, let you know, I'm adding in service worker to your project. And then when that's done processing, it will return down through and keep processing. In which case, it'll process your templates as well as spitting that out. So that's the process for adding a PWA. There's a little bit in terms of the icons and the manifest within the PWA itself, but mostly it's adding service worker. And service worker has a little bit more complex logic using the TypeScript AST to be able to find different modules of where it needs to modify code within there. But we're not going to dive into that because that's a little bit in depth of TypeScript AST and not so much schematics based. So the last one I wanted to do is the idea of ng update. And like I said, all of these features aren't Angular specific. Sure, you can run them from ng add and ng update, but to run those schematics, you can do that for anything. So it works on third-party libraries as well. So over here, I have the RxJS library I downloaded. I couldn't find it earlier because I hadn't updated master in many, many months. So I pulled it down. We're just going to go into the package.json. So in here, down at the bottom, we have an ng update tag. All right, it's a little bit different than how the schematics are set up, but it basically says, hey, ng update is a keyword that the ng update command will look for. And it's going to say, hey, where are your migrations? Basically, you can have multiple migrations. So if you are going from version 3 to 4, and then 4 to 5, or 4.1 to 4.2, and you have different changes that you want to bring in if somebody's updating your application. Update will figure out all those different logic points and say, oh, those schematics are the ones that I need to run for each one of those update steps. So conceivably, you could be several versions behind and get yourself all caught up with other versions as well by running ng update. And it'll say, hey, I'll find out what I need to run, and I'll run those for you. So you'll see here that this is all living under migrations collection.json. Collection. Looking at that, same thing. So it's going to say, hey, I'm going to find this one. In this case, there's only one, so it's going to just execute that particular one, noticing that it's going to this version. I think that might need to go to version 6 because it just went live earlier this week. And it's going to say, hey, that factory for that lives in the update directory for here, index. But you'll notice this hash here. And that hash basically says, all right, well, we're going to go to this file. Everything to the left of the hash is the path of where I find that file. And then everything to the right of the hash is whatever is being exported from that particular module. Think of it like load children when you're doing a lazy loaded route. To be able to say, hey, find the path, and then this is what I'm looking for exported from that particular module. So we'll go in there and we'll find that variable. I'll just copy that. We'll go in and we'll find that function. Great. So same logic. You see here, we're getting some options in, which we're not using, but it's defined anyway. And then we have the tree and the context. So we're going to go in. Ooh, I hate that. So I'm going to come in, find the package path, and say, all right, the package information is under package.json. We're going to read that out, and that's going to give us back a buffer or null. So we do a check to say, hey, can you find it? Great. All right, you found that. So then we're going to get the content, which is taking the buffer and making that a string so that we have the content of the file. We're going to parse it with a JSON parse, and then making sure that everything's okay there, that it's an object, not an array. Excuse me. Then we're going to make sure that it has dependencies. If it doesn't have dependencies, we're just going to make sure that that's an object, just a little safety within there. And then all we're going to do is we're going to add this RxJS compat library as a part of our dependencies. And then since we've updated that file, then we're just going to overwrite that file on disk and then be able to spit out that package path or that package content here, or to this location, we're going to spit out that object. Pretty straightforward. And then we're going to say, hey, since we went through and we modified package.json and we added a dependency within there, go ahead and install that dependency. This way the user doesn't have to do it. We're going to just do that convenience feature for them. And that's all there is to updating RxJS. So if you have a library and you're interested in adding update functionality, please talk to us about how to do that. We can set up the different migration steps from one version to the next, as well as ng-add. We'll be happy to help you through those. How am I doing with time, Stephen? More time, less time? A little bit more time? Nice. All right. Unless you guys are tired of hearing me talk. Never. Thank you, Deborah. All right. So how do you get started? I have a slide for that, but who cares about the slide? We'll just take a look at it. So what I did is, actually, I'll find out the slide. In here. I know. Only because it's helpful. So I've already done the first step. So npm install globally something called angular-devkit/schematic CLI. Great, another CLI to work with the CLI. But it's very helpful because rather than having to set these up by hand, you don't want to have to do that. It's nice and straightforward just to be able to say, hey, I want to be able to set up a schematic. So here you run the schematics CLI. Blank is the name of the schematic inside of the default schematic collection, which is @schematics/schematics. You don't have to type all of that out. So we default that, say, all right, if you don't specify a collection, we'll use that one. And inside there is a schematic called blank. And then I want to put it, give it a name, and I'm going to call that my project. And that will scaffold up a schematics project to allow you to define schematics of your own. That makes sense. All right. So I already have that installed, and let me check this. I'm on the right one. Perfect, because this is where I installed it into 8.10. So here, if I run schematics, and I'm going to run the blank schematic, and here we're going to call this ngmtv, Angular Mountain View. Command nothing. Schematics, it's plural. Spelling isn't important. Okay, so you notice what it's going to do, first of all, is it's creating that folder for me. See that everything's under ng-mtv, and then all the files that are necessary for that particular project. npm installs, great. Isn't it? Thank you. Live code is it's only knife 5. That's all I got in here. But look, it's jumping, so we're good.
Does it ever make sense just to copy and paste someone else's schematic instead of starting from scratch?
Maybe. It's the same thing with copying and pasting any code. That sometimes, yeah, maybe it does make sense, and sometimes it doesn't. Thank you for buying me time. All right. So we're going to come in here to our ngmtv. And I'm just going to open up VS Code. And when that opens, we should have a nice size. I don't like seeing this, so I'm just going to hide that. I'm going to open up a console so that we have access to that within here. And I bet you just put me back in 8.9. That's bad, because then schematics isn't installed. So we're just going to do nvm use, and we're going to use v8.10. .10, because that's important as well. Hide, because nobody wants to. Okay. All right, so now what we've done is we have our project, and in here, let's take a look at what we have. We have ourselves a package.json, which specifies schematics, and all those schematics that are here are actually under a folder called source, and then collection.json. So look, source, collection.json. Perfect. It's created us a blank schematic piece within here with one schematic based off of the name of our project. So we're already off and running, as well as, so if we go in there and look at that index file, we can see, hey, it doesn't do anything. It's blank, right? So there's nothing there. Options, so we're not going to use options, so I'm just going to put an underscore, otherwise the TS-lint rolls like, hey, there's options, but you're not using them. Okay, so all we're doing is return a tree. But there's also another file in here, in the same directory, called index-spec. Because, hey, running these things are great, but nobody wants to be going back and forth. Hey, did it work? I don't know. Did I change things? I'm not sure. So you want to write tests. I paid attention to your keynote, Rob and Steven from ngconf. Do you write tests? The answer is yes. Okay. So that's how we're going to test through this. So the first thing we're going to do, and you can see this test here, already has a default test that says, hey, it expects that the tree.files is empty. So we're going to run npm run test. I always do that. Command K clears the console. So we're going to run this test and say, hey, does this work? It doesn't. Why would it? I don't know. I don't know why. It was supposed to work. It ran it for me. It should have. No such file. It doesn't. Oh no, that's not good at all. I should have written more tests. I didn't write this schematic. Man, I know, right? Ooh, I know what I can. No. If you couldn't see me on the live feed, that's because I was glaring at somebody else. So if we go to here, ngconf, ls, cd ngconf, ls, cd playground. I did this before last week, so we can look at this. So let's look at this code here. I think these tests failed too. I got cheers last week for failing tests, which was interesting. All right, so let's come back here. I'm over time now, aren't I, Steven? Okay. So nvm ls, nvm. Typing, if you're going to code, learn to type. It's highly recommended. Use v8.10 npm run test. So this is actually the output of where I ended up. Good. Anywhere? Hey, those tests work. Okay. So this isn't anything I coded. This was here. So in here, we can see that all we're doing is we're rendering our own template against some options and specifying that the message is going to be ngconf. And then the spec file for that is going through and checking to see if my template has the content of hello ng-conf. Inside here is the file hello that gets rendered as part of that template. And then within here, you can see that there. So the nice thing is you can specify all these things up front with your spec of what options you want to run with and everything else so that you can just run those quickly in memory. They all process in memory. Nothing updates your local disk. And you can do all different types of tests. So in here, let's go through and I'll show you the one example that I was going to do real quick and the other one. And in order to do that, I'm going to have to do a few things. So let's hide that and that. So we are going to chain, which is the idea of taking multiple rules, and I'm going to run them in sequence. And we're going to return this out. And actually, that's a template source. Sorry. We are going to return chain, and we're taking an array of different rules that we're going to run. And we're going to move this up. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to run our template source. So all this shouldn't change our test output at all, because all we're doing is we're chaining, but we're just chaining one rule. And we already verified that that rule works. So this should still work as well. Should. Yes. Okay. So now what we're going to do is we're going to create another rule. So in here, I'm going to create a function that takes in the host, which is our tree, and then our context, schematic context. So we have that, which is a function. And inside of this particular function, we just need to put that there. Tree, you don't know what tree is? Come on. Import tree from there. So we have tree, we have context, but we're not using it. We're not going to use this. So all I want to do is say, hey, with that host, let's create a file. And we're going to create this file, and we're going to call it ngmtv. And then inside there, we're going to give it the content of long demo, because I'm running over time here. So what we're doing is we're going to create that file and see if that works. So we're just going to run that given schematic. And that works because we haven't changed any tests. So what we're going to do is we're going to do a quick copy here so that we don't have to worry about typos. And then also, I'm going to grab const content 2, because I'm original with my names. So tree.readContent. Read content, so you know, is a helper method that is only available on your unit test tree. If you're going to read a file, it will return you a buffer or null. But to make your writing your unit test easier, and rather than having to worry about checking to see if the buffer is null and then converting that buffer to a string, read content is just a helper method to be able to do that very quickly. So come in here, we're going to run this. So we're going to read the content in here. And then we're just going to expect that content 2 is going to be equal to long demo. And we're just going to spell it wrong to begin with so that we can show TDD, write a failing test, and then write a passing test. So as expected, our test fails. But if we correct this, then we see that our unit test works. I say that before it actually works in hopes that it actually does. And it does. Perfect. So the point I want to leave you with is that schematics are incredibly powerful. The examples that I showed here today are rather trivial. I've talked to some people that are writing more complex schematics. They're all observable based, so they can be asynchronous. One of the cooler things I heard from somebody who was looking at doing something was, if I want to generate data access to be able to access the database table, I'm going to write a schematic where I just give it the name of a database table. Well, my schematic knows how to connect to my database, find all those properties, write a data access service, as well as a component to be able to output all of those things for me to automatically present my data for me. So there's a lot of different tools that you can write with schematics. It's not just, hey, I generated a file. Also, you can extend the internal schematics or your own. So if for whatever reason, I don't want to start this battle, but if you like tabs versus spaces, you can reprocess the given schematics and replace all the 2 spaces with tabs. Just saying, if that's how you feel, then hey, feel free to go ahead and do that. All right, so what I'm going to do, I'm going to turn it back over to Hans. Hans is going to talk a little bit more about the future of the CLI. Perfect.
Three, 4. Oh, it works with 3, 4, not with 1.
6.
Okay.
Sorry.
Cool. Thanks. Yeah. So I'm back to talk about the future of the CLI. Subtle. You got it. And so one thing that we're going to concentrate right after the 6.0 release is really documentation, because you might not know, but you are the lucky ones to have the most up-to-date documentation on schematics brought to you by our team and on library support. Because right now our documentation is a little bit on the missing side. And so we're going to really concentrate on that to make sure that the developer experience is the best that we can provide and is up to par with everything else. So schematic production, build schematics, documentation, build documentation, how to make your builds, how to use your builds, how to use the CLI in general. Even that is a little bit missing. And of course, all the docs that we can produce. As engineers, we're not necessarily used to working on documentation, so we're going to make a lot of efforts for that for you guys. Another thing that we're going to support in the short future is custom build systems. So and when I talk about, sorry, I should have changed that slide, but build system means really like runners, task runners, and custom tasks. What I want to mention is that a lot of you, for example, say like, hey, I want to use Jest. I want to use Rollup instead of Webpack, or I want to customize my Webpack config. So our answers to you is basically, we will support custom tasks. We will support custom task runners. And because of that, you will be able to change tests so that ng-test does whatever you want it to do. And if you want to use Jest, if we want to use just something that returns true with a thumbs up, you will be able to do that. Also, we'll support first party. We'll have support for Bazel. Bazel is awesome. If you haven't used it, try it. It's really great. It's not complicated at all. I do not know why they're laughing, because it's actually a custom Webpack config builder too. That's coming from our team as a way for you to eject in a better way, so that you can eject like some of you might do and still use the CLI at the end. So ng build with a Webpack config. And custom tasks that you guys want. It's like you have some files to copy, you have some files to move around. You could do that. And we're going to provide more automated workflow in general. We're going to really embrace the ng-add workflow and provide, for example, ng-add Bazel, which will create Bazel configurations for your project. And we're going to add SEO, which would upgrade your project to support search engine optimizations. If you haven't watched Igor's talk at the NGConf last week on search engine optimizations, I recommend it highly. He did a really good job. Universal, I think we already have something in the plan for Universal in general, but ng-add Universal will have like first-party support. Also coming up, some improvements to schematics. Mike didn't really talk about the future there, but we'll support prompts so that you can actually create schematics that will interact with your users. We'll have better debugging tools, also better documentation to accompany these debugging tools, and some refactoring tools and libraries to help you. If you want to, for example, create new project, augment the CLI configuration with whatever you want, you'll be able to do that using our tooling, which is going to stay compatible and stay up to date with whatever the latest CLI provides to users. And sandboxing. Sandboxing is a little bit special. One of the use cases that Mike said was that some people want to create a schematics that either fetch or update a database. And that's a really good example. And that's something that we want to provide. But it's something that, whether or not you're running into Node or you're running into a custom VM, you might have a different API. And so sandboxing will guarantee that whatever you do, you follow a strict list of standards that we provide. And with that, you gave the guarantee. When you build your schematics, you give the guarantee that essentially you can work in any environment. And this is important because we're gonna provide native supports for certain IDEs. For example, VS Code. So having a VS Code extension for schematics that allows you to run and install schematics automatically in your VS Code projects, and thus also provide any schematics other in you to actually be able to run inside VS Code automatically, which makes it super accessible for your users. And Stack Blitz, of course. They rock. And so we're going to proceed to a small and smart, I hope, round of questions by you guys. You want to get back on stage, Steven, or?
Why don't we have the CLI folks come back on stage and we'll switch over to Q&A.
Yeah. But I want to thank you, all of you, as users of the CLI. You're the reasons we're making this. You're the reason we come back to work every day. Because otherwise, I'd rather stay in my bed.
The comeback part.
I've got one thing that I forgot to mention, as Hans mentioned, the idea of schematics.
You said everything, but
so as of right now, with version 1.7 of the CLI, you're limited to the number or to what options you're able to provide as default for the schematics. With version 6, you're going to be able to, any option that's available for any schematic, whether or not that's one provided from the team, or the default schematics, or your schematics, you'll be able to specify in your angular.json.
Yeah.
So opening the doors.
Why wouldn't you?
Because what was the current limitation and feature?
Oversight.
Oh, yeah.
All right, with that, we're turning it over to the audience here. I think we even have an audience camera in this room. Ooh.
We have a few questions. People raising their hands. Are you going to walk?
Yeah, I'll walk the column.
Thank you. Yes.
Question about schematics. Is that do you use EJS by any chance, or any different interpolators?
Do we?
So it's a flavor of EJS. So it's not EJS specifically, but the same syntax is what you would use when you're doing EJS.
Did you build it from the scratch?
Me? No, that was him.
Who?
So we essentially build a compiler for EJS, but the old version. It's not the new version with like imports and stuff like that. So it's a really simple EJS, and essentially, yeah, we basically built a compiler to make sure that it was performant and that it was really working well. Yeah, and the reason we built a compiler is that we can also compile those files preemptively and just run them at runtime. So we keep a cache of them and all that.
I think this is open source, right? Or schematics?
Yeah, yeah, everything is open source.
Do you consider making it usable for any other languages as well?
I mean, it's EJS, so it modifies a text file the way you want it. So you could Schematics itself will not support schematics declared in other languages. You won't be able to create a schematics in C++, for example, but you could create easily a schematics that outputs C++ or that refactors C++. That you could do. Using JavaScript and the schematic CLI, yes. Or TypeScript. TypeScript is better.
All right, next question. You need to be an acrobat in this room.
Like a cat.
Yeah.
Thank you. For the new ng update command, just in case if something goes into an unexpected condition, can we do something like use the same command to recover into an older version, or there is a similar command to do recovery?
Yeah. So you want to talk
Yeah.
about this, or
We don't enforce it at this point because not everybody uses Git. But ideally, you want to get yourself into a pristine state with your Git repository.
Yeah.
Commit before you make any changes, because if something does go wrong, or if something isn't behaving exactly as you want, then be able to revert or undo your changes.
Also, we're moving more and more to having things without side effects. One thing that we want to consider heavily is that, for example, you can npm install without actually committing to disk. And as such, if there is an error later in the process, you'd be able, nothing would happen on your file system because the error would happen in schematics.
If you guys can keep him going all the way back and forth, that'd be
Didn't run
great.
today.
It's like an obstacle course.
Did you hand him a mic that wasn't on?
Supposed to be up. Just push. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. So can I ng update a project which was created using an older version of CLI, or it has to be created with the newer version and then only I can use the ng update?
ng update is a 6.0 command. It's not supported in 1.7.
No, so I have a code base which is using Angular 4. It uses the older HTTP library. I want it to upgrade to Angular 6 with the HTTP client, the newer HTTP client.
So we didn't write update schematics for Angular for older version than 5. So 4 to 5, for example, we didn't write anything. So the first order that you should do is update to 5 or 6, Angular 5 or 6, Angular CLI 6, and then you can start using ng update. It's more like a future thinking feature than, we didn't go in the past and just revisit every version that we had, unfortunately, because of time, really.
But I believe, Stephen, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but the upgrade.angular.io, is that the correct URL, I believe? We'll have all that information of what you need to do to be able to upgrade your application.
Update.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Update.
so
Yeah, you can see that.
update.angular.io is a site that we were beting in previous releases, where you put in what version you're coming from, what version you're going to, and then it gives you kind of a more semantic understanding of what's going on in the changelog. So all the changes you need to make to your app to respond to what happened within Angular. And the idea is that eventually ng update will automatically update your app as needed. But obviously, there's always going to be things that you can't mechanically transform. And so our hope is that the update guide will kind of break down some of those changes for you. If you try going from version 4 to version 6, it'll still give you the commands to theoretically run, but also say a warning like, hey, the recommendation is update to the latest, update one major at a time. And there actually is an ng update command in 1.7.
Yeah, it's been disabled in 1.7.5.
Oh, great.
Because it doesn't work. It only did the package JSON part. It didn't do the refactoring.
The new ng update is very, very powerful.
Yeah,
agreed.
And I want to say there is some confusion on upgrade versus update. And upgrade is really for upgrading your application from Angular.js to Angular 2 and plus. Update is what is the Angular command. Hey, that's me. And it's for updating your packages, your dependencies from one version to another. Any other question? Oh, yes.
Hi. Regarding schematics, I think it's very interesting. Like, I'm thinking of ways to probably creating helpers to generate code that is very kind of like corporate. They have a lot of common libraries and stuff. So I saw that you showed some examples about creating files with templates. But what you're doing also is wonder if there's also updating existing files, and how complex is the reading these files. I think you showed one example of updating the JSON package.
Yes.
You just stringify and put it back there. But can we also kind of have some helpers for modifying TS code or something like that?
So as of right now, we don't have a library that we're publishing to help with working with the TypeScript AST. We just actually, somebody pointed out this week, there's a library called TS Query, which will help to get started. I know Hans has done some work on a library that would help not only with querying, but also with updating, but nothing like that is ready quite yet. So whatever tooling you can find to work with AST, or if regex works for you, whatever you need.
Please don't use regex.
Don't use regex.
So one of the things I do, for example, when I'm working on a schematic, is I look at other examples that I know do something similar. So there's actually a lot of good examples in the baked-in schematic. So for example, when you ng generate a component, it's going to automatically add that component into its module. And so if you look at the generate command for a component, it's got this helper method that looks for the associated module. It shows you how to kind of use the AST parsing to figure out where you should be adding that module and those sorts of things. So there's some really good examples. I think the team has been asked for higher level methods to help with those sorts of things. And I think some of that's maybe coming in the future. But even just like, this is a problem that kind of more and more schematics are solving over time. So Materials doing this, ng Bootstrap. So they all have publicly available schematics that are doing similar things, and they've all built their own helper methods. And so you might be able to take a look at their code and learn something from it, or maybe copy and paste. Don't copy and paste.
So I presented at the San Francisco meetup. I don't remember exactly when it was, about a month ago, about refactoring, and specifically like how to do refactoring and how to manipulate ASTs. This is a hard problem, and it's not just hard for TypeScript. Even languages that are longer, older, like Java, that has a lot of like refactoring tools. They're always limited in what they can do. This is a really hard problem to do right. And yeah, if we have time, we're going to try to tackle it. In the meantime, we do provide some functions, some code. We do use some code that we coded for this exact problem, but it's a really hard problem, and there's not a lot of documentation, unfortunately.
Sure, go ahead.
Refactoring, I'm wondering, is there any way that if you isolate the model logic and then the your actual language, your own framework, is there any way?
So you're saying abstract the model of the AST itself?
My model, if entity, I just give it away, so the model doesn't affect, and then my logic, business logic, whatever I have, I also keep it in the code separate, and then your framework, it's all your syntax. That keep it away in a separate workspace or something, or file.
We actually support that use case, but this is not refactoring, right? You're talking about like a tool that.
For refactoring, I'm working on it. That's why I'm asking. I'm working on the same approach of what I'm talking, keeping the isolating, separating the model logic and the framework syntax. Yeah. Any language.
Yeah, that's a hard problem.
So I was wondering. Thank you.
So I built a little proof of concept that actually does something like that, where you can actually jump between languages, and you can say like, okay, like I'm looking for a template version of this component, and it's going to look through all your code and figure out the template and make the links between ASTs like that. But at that point, like it's a graph it's a graph query problem, and well, I don't want to get into the math, but the algorithms for flooding a graph are kind of slow for these kind of use cases, and if you want to modify the graph and then re-output it, it's really hard. So, so yeah, it's not an easy problem. Yeah.
Hi, thanks for the meetup. My name is Hari. My question is more with respect to the internationalization, how we cannot, like right now we have the I18N strings in the template, right? So the schematics or anything that CLI 6 offers, is there anything that where you can have the dynamic, have the strings somewhere and dynamically, put them in the template for internationalization? Like, I mean, right now, when you use I18N, right? I mean, all the strings have to be in the template. Like, it cannot be anywhere else. I mean, in the native, right? Like, I know. I think I was following the roadmap of 6. I think in Angular 6, I think there's a roadmap to have dynamic strings for internationalization, right? So, does this? I mean, is there anything that we can do with schematics with respect to that?
Yes, you could do a schematics. We're not planning to support that, but you can definitely do that, and that would be something our users would probably be grateful for. Is that
Well, and from what I've heard, we're not particularly working on anything specific for improvements for internationalization, but I believe the core team is potentially making some changes. I'm not aware of those and don't want to speak incorrectly to those, but I know that there are improvements for internationalization coming. Localization, thank you. I don't want to speak to anything because I'd probably be giving wrong information.
Ordered and stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah, no.
My mom's watching and.
All right, we got another question over here.
Thank you. Hi. So I've seen the library 6 support, right? Is this the only thing to start from the scratch, or is anything, any way to update the previously developed library packages using ng packager to support Angular 6 library support?
Okay, so like imagine that you have one that's using ng packager. Like we don't do a lot of magic there. We just say, here's the ng packager config. So if you have a library that was built with ng packager, you can just move it in, and assuming that like you do stuff the ng packager way, you shouldn't have any problems. If you have a library that wasn't ng packager, well, I wouldn't expect it to just like work magically however you were building it, because it is a problem of like the build pipeline. ng packager works because it builds stuff in a certain way and it has certain expectations. Your library that wasn't built with ng packager is built in a different way. That doesn't mean it won't work. Like if it's like a reasonable library that's not doing, weird stuff that ng packager doesn't do, maybe you can do this for starters. You just make a new library in RC6 CLI project. You look at the file structure and it's like, okay, I have an index, I have a couple of modules, etc. Just copy over your stuff, put it there, try to build, see what happens. Like I can't say that it's definitely going to work or definitely not work, but I think for like what 60% of use cases, it probably will.
It's easy to move from whatever build system. It's relatively easy to move from whatever build system you're using to using the CLI to build your libraries. We did move an application that was using a really custom Webpack config. It took us a few hours, 3 hours approximately, but it did work in the end. So you can definitely do it yourself. It might require a lot of changes and a lot of work, but yeah. Yeah, I'm not sure we want a question from you.
This should be a softball. So I have a question about ng add specifically. So I think it's really cool to basically where a package might normally say, hey, npm install this thing and you're good to go. Instead, say ng add, and on top of that, it imports it into your ng module or whatever have you, right? So my question is kind of around the UX, because if I was going to add, like when I install a package or whatever, I want to make sure that I'm wiring it up to my application, and I want to know what's really going on. So I know you mentioned something about prompt, like adding prompts and that sort of thing. So I was wondering if there is any consideration, or if it's already built in, like when you run ng add, if it says, hey, we're going to do 3 things. We're going to install it. We're going to do this thing, do that thing. Do you want all 3? Do you want just one? Or just kind of prompting like what's going to happen before it actually happens, so I can say, oh no, I don't want to do that. You know what I mean? I don't know.
Well, so there's 2 steps to ng-add. The first step is npm install, and it installs the package. So if you add, you can add sub packages. We can go into a little bit more technical details, but anyway, we install the package that you're pointing at, and then we run the ng-add schematic that it declares. And if there is no ng-add schematic, then we just tell the user nothing happened, because that's the truth. And I mean, at that point, the choice is to tell the user, like, well, you can either npm install the package yourself, or you can install the package and run, or if the package is already there, you could you can use actually ng generate, or ng-add will not install the package if it's already found in your modules. So the user can have a choice by the add command being like relatively simple. It's more like of a shorthand and convention for library authors that ng-add, if they want to have like an easy workflow to add their stuff to your application, then they can use the ng-add convention essentially.
But to clarify, because it seemed like you were asking about the end user experience, not the library developer. In order to be able to prompt to say, hey, these are the things I'm going to do. Do you want to do that? We're going to need to provide a mechanism within schematics to provide prompts to be able to show a message, get further input, then proceed again. That interaction isn't there as of right now.
What about dry run? Yeah, you can also dry run ng-add.
But that's still not interactive. But
it's not. But it's going to tell you like, oh, I would do that. The same way you would like ng generate component dry run, and that will still install the package, but at least you have a better understanding.
Gotcha. Yeah, and you said that, I think that was on one of the slides, right? Is adding prompts in. So that's
Yeah.
like on the road. Okay, gotcha.
Yeah, actually, we support ng-add at Angular/PWA works right now, and it works the way you expect it to work.
My question for schematics, can you run schematics on demand? Meaning like I have my npm package and I want to run the schematic on a project and can do this global if you have installed globally, kind of like CLI helper with schematics?
So the on-demand aspect is on you. There's nothing to say, hey, I'm going to poll and eventually, oh, I think he might want to run it now. I'm going to run it. There's no mechanisms for that. But if you have your own mechanism of when to run a schematic, it'll run whenever you decide that they need to run.
Also, I want to point out that there is 3 levels of resolution when you run schematics using the CLI and the schematic CLI. So the first level is your own package. So yeah, if you have a schematic and you say I want to run an external schematics, it's going to look in your own package first if it's there. The second level is in the project itself, like where basically you're running off, and the third level is global. So if it doesn't find it in the first 2, it's going to look globally if you have a schematic. So if you do like ng generate, I don't know, at narval or at narval/nx colon component. I don't know if you have that, but let's say they have. It's going to look at in those 3 places, and if you have narval installed globally but not locally, then it's going to still use narval globally. So you could technically install globally some schematics and use those. Oh, over there.
All right, we're gonna do one more group question, and then we'll let the main group go, and then people can ask CLI questions to the team directly.
So let's say if I have an Angular schematic right now, and I want to share that with another team. It will have this roughly similar behavior, but they want to do something a little bit different on one step on that. So what's the recommended approach to that? Does Angular schematic offer something like an overriding or extending an existing schematic, or it's just going to be like sequential? Schematic 1 will override action, the previous action or things like that.
So there's some built-in rules that allow you to do different processing. I think he wants the mic. There's some built-in rules that allow you to do things. We looked at chain a little bit today. We looked at filter, and then merge with, branch and merge, those types of rules. One of the ones when we looked at the PWA add schematic was something called external schematic, which allows you to process an external one, passing in whatever options are made available to that. But if you branch and merge when you do that, you can go ahead and customize whatever you want that's coming back to that to your tree. So if you wanted to run the default Angular schematic, and maybe you wanted to add a header to every TS file, well, you can go through that, and as those files come through, you can say, hey, there's a TS file. I need to add my company legal jargon to the top of that template or to that TS file. You can certainly do that and expand that functionality. That's the composability nature of them. Like I explained with ng-new, that it does ng-new, workspace, application, module, component. It does all those different things just by bundling it all up in the ng-new schematic. And those are layered as well, because ng-new has no knowledge that it's actually creating a component, because it's just saying, hey, I'm creating a workspace. And the workspace says, oh, hey, whenever I create one of these, I'm supposed to create an application. So it creates the application. And then the application is the one that actually knows that, oh, I'm going to need a module for that application. Now I'm going to need a component, and it renders those as part of that. So they're very composable to be able to use them almost like Lego building blocks to build more complicated logic on top of each other.
And there is a property of the collection that we didn't talk about, which is extends. And you can extend another collection, just replacing the ones you want. So you can do that too. I don't know if you guys hear me well.
Awesome. So how many people here have ever built or want to build a component library? Okay, a lot of you. I think my hope, and I maybe the CLI team shares this, I hope every single component library builds an ng-add and ng-update, because I see a world where it's easier for people to adopt your code and integrate your best practices into their application, and it's easier for them to stay up to date with you. And this is all really enabled by schematics under the hood. So it's very, very powerful. So let's give the CLI team another big round of applause.
Oh.
And should we sing for Filipe's birthday?
Yeah, I was going to say, like, can anybody give us a me? Me? No, okay. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear Filipe. Happy birthday to you.
Thank you.
Woo!
Is this your first live streamed birthday?
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
Well, it's my third or something.
Okay.
See you next year.
Thank you. So thank you so much, everyone, for coming. Hopefully, we'll see you on May 7th for the social meetup. The CLI team will be around to hang out if you want to say hi. Thanks, everyone. Bye.